Well, I can see why South Africa have brought the case. There is great concern about the effect upon civilians of the conflict between the Israel Defense Forces and Hamas. And Hamas committed a brutal act against Israeli civilians and killed over 1,000 in a planned attack. No state would allow a terrorist group to commit that on their land without taking retribution. But the problem for Israel is that Hamas are using the civilian population as a shield, human shield. They have a network of tunnels that are under the ground in Gaza. They have installations near areas such as hospitals or schools or civilian accommodation. And that makes it very hard for an army attacking an enemy, because that's what it is here, to not have collateral damage that affects the civilian population. Now, South Africa has brought a claim, obviously with concern about the effect upon the civilian population. And I believe it has put it in the context of a genocide claim in order to get the maximum publicity at the International Court of Justice. Looking at the claim itself, it is very broad, and there are a number of mutually exclusive grounds within that South African claim that is very, very general. And what it reviews is the historical political position between Israel and Palestine. And genocide is not an attack on a state. Genocide is an attack on a people. And the way I reviewed the South African claim was that it, in its majority of allegations and structure, had framed itself as a complaint against Israel that was almost state-based rather than people-based. And it may be because it was drafted by international public lawyers, I don't know. But that is what I've looked at in relation to that document. Israel, on the other hand, in its contention to the South African claim, is going into a whole realm of denial and not structuring its claim in a way that challenges the concept that this is a genocide that is part of its state policy. So that's my overall review of what I've seen of the documentation so far and reports on the submissions in court. I think they rather missed that point, that the charge of genocide is in relation to a crime against a people rather than against a state, and that they missed that point, that that was the way South Africa had put its claim. I think that the denials are understandable, but I think there is a lack of humility in the submissions by Israel acknowledging the effects on the civilian population. When I was first asked about this matter at the start of the conflict, I said, I understand why the Israel Defense Forces are seeking to avenge and attack their enemy, Hamas, for killing civilians in cold blood on their territory. However, I think that this is going to end up in trouble because the political option has not been looked at nor pursued by Israel. It went to war first. And I would have advised them that you give 30 days for the political leadership in Gaza to deliver up the Hamas soldiers, terrorists, militia, call them whatever you like, or whatever other groups, because there are splinter groups as well, that committed these attacks. It is up to you to deliver up those people who have committed a cold-blooded crime against civilians. And if you don't, we are then going to have to wage war. And I think politically that would have caused a great deal of pressure upon the Palestinian authorities to act as an authority and deliver up Hamas, as well as Hamas to take into account the effects of a war and conflict upon its civilian population that it claims to be fighting for. So that was my approach when I was first asked about this matter when the atrocities first happened. No, it doesn't. And the assertion that they have taken all measures to protect the civilian population is plainly wrong. It's not right. And I think the devastation that outsiders can see of civilian homes, civilian property, and damage to civilian life is such that that claim has difficulty in standing. We haven't got to the evidence in this case yet, but from my position as an observer and other observers, there is great concern about the damage to the civilian population. You've got to bear in mind that when an enemy is using a civilian population as a human shield and using it as a cover, there inevitably will be consequences to the civilian population in times of conflict and fighting. However, the attackers, I believe, need to factor in more of protections for the civilian population than they have. But this is not an easy matter. You know, this is not just cut and dried one way or the other, because Israel has a right to pursue its enemy Hamas, but it has a duty to a civilian population to protect it. Now, whether this is the context of a genocide, I very much doubt. And I think the South African claim is a means of ventilating this into the wider world as a part of the political pressure upon Israel. Yes, of course, there's a great lack of evidence of genocidal intent, which is a requirement to establish the crime of genocide. And genocide is a crime committed with the intent to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group in whole or in part. But the context of this conflict is a armed conflict between defense forces and militia forces representing people within Gaza. Although I am not sure that it would ever be right to say that the Palestinian Authority itself supports Hamas as its military force. So the context of this is a conflict between an attacker that committed atrocities against a civilian population, Hamas, and armed forces of a state that is seeking to protect itself from the attacking armed force. To put that into the context of genocide is, in my view, very, very shaky and weak. And to say that various news clips from politicians establish that it is an intent to destroy, or in whole or in part, the Palestinian people, I don't believe is strong evidence at all. And I saw the statements that were made. Many statements are made in wars, but they don't prove a genocidal intent. They are statements made as much for internal propaganda and internal political purposes, to show that you are doing something to your electorate, because don't forget, the citizens of Israel are outraged, horrified, and in shock. So I don't think that such evidence establishes genocidal intent at all. Neither does the nature of the conflict establish a genocidal intent. So I'm not convinced by that at this stage, from what I have seen and what the claims are based upon. I think that the conflict is a serious conflict that has a danger of spreading throughout the region. And for that reason, the United Nations must view this, as well as the local states, the Middle Eastern group of states, as a conflict that threatens the peace and security of the region. And they must take all measures to stop this, and then at the end of this conflict to sort out a justice for the Palestinian people, whereby they do not have to rely upon militia groups, terrorist groups that attack civilians. And there is a duty upon all the states in that region not to use this as a short-term political attack upon Israel, but to seek a long-term solution. There is a duty upon Israel to stand back and look at the devastation of Gaza and wonder whether it would have liked that to have happened to its people, even in pursuit of an enemy. So I think the opportunity for a long-term political settlement must be taken, and the State of Israel has a great responsibility to engage with its neighbors to ensure that that takes place.